Welcome to the Accessible Learning Experience, where we help you turn learning barriers into learning opportunities. We're excited to bring you this Season 2 bonus episode featuring the South Carolina Department of Education, or SCDE. We were introduced to SCDE by both the Office of Special Education Programs and the Office of Educational Technology at the U.S. Department of Education. This past May, OSEP and OET partnered on a month-long campaign to celebrate Global Accessibility Awareness Day. And that campaign included hosting a joint webinar featuring the evolution of SCDE's Digital Accessibility Initiative. Alerted by a 2017 letter of complaint from the Office of Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education that cited accessibility violations on its website, SCDE has taken multiple actions to improve digital accessibility within the agency and for districts across the state. In this episode, AIMS Center Project Director Cynthia Curry interviews SCDE digital accessibility leaders Valerie Bird, who's a senior consultant, and Lydia Hutto, who's a training coordinator and staff technology instructor. Here's our conversation between Cynthia, Valerie, and Lydia.
Valerie and Lydia, welcome to the Accessible Learning Experience. Let's start with introductions. Tell us a little bit about yourselves and your work in digital accessibility and what brought you here.
Prior to joining the State Department of Education, I actually worked for our state information technology division, and my role was serving as the state E-rate coordinator and network administrator for K-12 and state library systems. My responsibility was to ensure that all school districts, as well as public library systems statewide, had internet connectivity and bandwidth. So I was already in the arena of making sure that from a statewide approach, all individuals, students, schools, and libraries, and our general public had access to internet and connectivity. So it fall right in my wheelhouse that I would want those individuals to also have equal access to digital content.
Great, thanks for sharing that relationship between accessibility really does cross a lot of contexts around equity for students. So I appreciate how you make that connection to digital accessibility. Lydia, how about you? What were you doing before joining the South Carolina Department of Education?
So before I came to the Department of Education, I actually was a teacher. I was in the classroom. I started out elementary certified, just kind of going into the world, not knowing what that would be. My first job was actually in a high school. I was a computer lab in a high school with voc ed kids. So I kind of got a interesting introduction to using technology to try and meet things that were missing with those students. We did a lot of screening to see what they needed and helping them with math and reading. But I ended up in middle school science. That's what I love to do. And then just kind of moving around and doing different things. I worked at ETV for a while, and I got to interact with the Department of Education with some of the PBS Kids programming that they developed. And then I decided to go back into the classroom, and I did Montessori. And I am ashamed to say that through all of that, I really didn't know very much at all about accessibility. It wasn't until I actually came to the department and we kind of got our hands slapped a little bit that I thought, oh my word, this has been law for a long time, and how come we don't know about it? So that was what really motivated me to say, we got to do a better job. We need to be teaching everybody, and our staff, their parents, they have kids in the school system. We need to do a better job with this.
I love how you make that connection through capacity building based on your experience. So I think South Carolina Department of Ed is really fortunate to have you because you come with some compassion for those teachers for whom accessibility is new, and thinking about it from your own career and all of the competing factors and the complexities of being a teacher, and thinking about what are the best approaches to introduce and to scaffold and to support teachers in this process. So thanks for that. Let's talk about the origins of digital accessibility in the South Carolina Department of Education as it is today. Say a little bit more about how digital accessibility for students with disabilities was brought to the attention of your agency. How did that come about?
Well, how digital accessibility became brought to the attention of the State Department of Education was that I would say we had a little bit of a advantage here in that we had representatives of different organizations, public and private sectors, and state agencies that were a part of ATAC, which later became known as ASCID, that we already had kind of like a collaboration and partnership going on amongst different entities with different backgrounds. And from that perspective, we had a little bit about assistive technology, which later transitioned to accessibility, became more so ingrained with digital accessibility when receiving an audit, a compliance audit indicator from the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights Justice, which let us know that some key things that we were doing wrong impacted those with disabilities, such as our website having a carousel of images that continuously rotated without giving the option to stop that rotation and start at will. Also, the way we improperly had our PDF documents posted on our website without having any type of tagging. Key components of that would impact individuals with disabilities of being able to access content on our website. And us being public servants, we should not want to exclude anyone if there's a way for us to avoid in doing so. Training also was very important for us. Once we found out more about accessibility and how we could implement some of the best practices, we began training the right people in-house, as well as all of our staffs, to start transitioning that culture of applying more accessibility ingrained into our processes and procedures. And of course, with us being the State Department of Education, we wanted those entities that we serve, which are schools and districts, as well as which included teachers and students, to have access to the same important information and those practices to help them.
Thanks, Valerie. Picking up on the focus of the compliance audit from the Office for Civil Rights being focused on your agency's website. Lydia, why don't you pick up there? Because SCDE, the South Carolina Department of Education, has really gone much deeper. You've gone beyond just thinking about your agency's website. A lot of states and districts are under the impression that digital accessibility really only need begin and end at a public-facing website. But what have you learned about deeper needs for digital accessibility for students with disabilities in South Carolina?
So I really think that a lot of things just sort of came together at the right time at the Department of Ed. I started right after Val, like I said, under just our Chief Information Officer as staff tech trainer. Shortly after that, the decision was made that we needed a Chief Strategy Officer to come in and make sure that all the administrators, deputies, directors were hitting their targets that they needed to be doing on their work for the department. And she was part of that team that got notified about our website. So we met with our new Chief Information Officer and our webmaster to say, what can we do about this? How are we going to attack this? And one of the very first things we realized was we have a lot of people across the agency creating content for this website. And they're not sort of going through a set process to make sure that checks have been put in place and that we're all trying to adhere to the same process and the way we do things. So, the decision was made to sort of try to narrow that down, make sure that they meet once a month and have a training with the webmaster about how to use the content management system, just some sort of basic things. But I think this could apply, across a lot of different settings. You got to just sort of determine what's the process, make sure that we're all doing it the same way, make sure that people have a place to come to ask their questions, make sure that someone's looking to see that it's being done properly. All these different things have contributed to addressing that issue. We also partnered with some of our community partners to sponsor big name trainers like WebAIM. We've had them come several times. The first time was, goodness, I think maybe 2018, Valerie. They came to the USC Law School, who is our neighbor, and we actually invited school district staff to come if they were interested. And a lot of their tech people came, and we kind of realized, oh, another audience, that may or may not be trained in this accessibility thing. So we've repeated that. And because of that, we met Judy Risch at the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights. And we found out about the National Digital Accessibility Team. And we started having them do some trainings in the afternoons for teachers. So just a lot of these different things, trying to open it up and invite people to participate and getting people to not be afraid to admit that they didn't know or they didn't know how to fix it, and that we wanted to help, that we weren't trying to make them look bad. We wanted to help make things look better. I think that was kind of where it really started, and I've learned that from previous jobs. You got to find that trust factor first so that people will tell you about their problems so you can help them find their solution to their problems.
The concepts of partnerships are so important in this work around accessibility, and building those relationships obviously requires trust. And it sounds like you've had a lot of success with that at SCDE, and you've picked some good partners. So WebAIM and the Office for Civil Rights National Digital Access Team really couldn't be much better supporters in this work. And the way you identified them as supports for your districts, I think that's a great model. It certainly could be replicated by other states because WebAIM and the National Digital Access Team really are available for these types of supports, particularly Judy Risch and Mary Lou Mobley at the Office for Civil Rights are always willing to support states and districts around digital accessibility. As I'll put in a plug for ourselves here at the National AIM Center, we're here as TA specialists as well, and so delighted that we're working together. So Valerie, with this work that SCDE has started with districts, what recommendations do you have for district administrators? What's important for them to know about starting an initiative around digital accessibility and then sustaining it over time?
First and foremost, as far as school district administrators, they need to understand that the greatest challenge is the change of mindset and having patience, because adapting to change takes time. We are public servants serving our various communities from the perspective of K-12. Some key points that they need to consider include connecting with the right people. That will be your internal and your external collaborations. This could be new partnerships, new individuals, as well as those that are already in-house. For example, your webmasters, some of your knowledge level experts, especially those that do web design or are responsible for your website. Different departments collaborate together from a team approach. This could be your IT leaders plus your instructional technology leaders and your special education departments in those roles as well. Train the right people, very important. Your content specialists, anyone that's responsible for creating content, be it documents or even in-house customized systems. This could include the procurement department, for they need to know what specifications need to be included into those contracts to make sure that they're doing due diligence and ensuring that no students are being left out of some of the content or products that are purchased. Also considering establishing a support team of individuals. This could include those individuals that create policies, such as your HR department. It could also include developing a team in-house that will be a collaboration of different departments, including HR, and most importantly, senior staff. Having those components in place would help to assist and enable a change of mindset and thus building a culture of accessibility.
Valerie, what you're saying really underscores that digital accessibility in general is so different from assistive technology or making sure that materials and technologies are available to students, but it's really about making sure that they can be used by students with disabilities in general education. It's not a special education initiative. It really requires leadership, but also a distribution of people from cross-functional multidisciplinary areas of the system in order to coordinate it. And I also love your reference to the term components, because there are so many components of accessibility because there are so many pathways by which materials and technologies reach students. Lydia, what services and resources does SCDE make available to districts?
My role has primarily been for our agency staff, but what we have done in the since January actually is, as we've invited districts to trainings from a tech point, like with the WebAIM, to Department of Education, to teachers, so we've seen that need that's there, right? And the realization that Val and I were not enough people to cover the whole state, even though we're a small state. So we have used some of our funding to bring on some more staff. So it kind of began with inviting them to these accessibility trainings as teachers or district tech folks that support the accessibility work in the districts to, hey, let's have a dedicated staff person to look at school district websites for things that could be a problem and reach out to them and say, hey, I noticed these things that are on your website, you know, and we've pitched it at some of our there's a couple of professional organizations for administrators. We've gone to those different roundtable meetings and pitched it to them as a, hey, these are things that we anticipate it not just being if you receive federal funding, you are required to do this, but hey, if you have a public facing website, you're going to be required to do this. Can we help you? If we look at your website and find something, do you have somebody that would like to talk about that? So that's been in place since actually last October is when Sean Osborne came on board. And we had a little kind of hesitancy at first. They weren't sure what we were trying to do, but then as it has worked through and people have started to hear it, and we've had some consolidations where people have needed to create a new website, it's kind of picking up momentum, and it's been really exciting to see how people now want us to, like, let me be next. I want to get in line for this. And then in January, we added someone to be a district accessibility trainer for teachers. So she's been working on content specifically for classroom teachers as a former special education teacher, to kind of think about, hey, somebody in the classroom, they're thinking about teaching, they're thinking about children, they're thinking about the children's needs. What are they missing? And a lot of them were like me. They'd never heard of it. They had no idea. But as we've all gone online since the pandemic, we've realized there's an increased need. Like you said, we're trying to communicate. We are communicating to the whole state. We need to make sure everything we put out there is accessible, even just at the basic level of, can I read it and it makes sense to me? Can I print your picture and read the words on it, not just see it? Because, we know how that works. If you have no alternative text or no captions, sometimes it doesn't make sense. So we're working on our resources to districts. We're building, and we actually have a boot camp for teachers this summer. It's our first annual one that I think Valerie's going to talk about in a little bit, that we're very excited about.
I love this notion of incentivized accountability. You're going out and looking for opportunities to help people do better. This coming from an agency reaching out, see your website's not accessible, but we also want to help you. So it's not a gotcha. SCDE is there to provide supports for continuous improvement. Thank you for that, for those examples of what's happening in SCDE around services and resources. And as you mentioned, there is an exciting boot camp coming up this summer. Valerie, so tell us about that and some of the other things that are coming next for SCDE around digital accessibility.
Well, sure. As Lydia mentioned, and as you stated, we're very excited to host our first ever accessibility boot camp this summer, July 18th through 19th in person. Um, some of our partners include the AIM Center, CAST, Teach Access, our State Department of Education, of course, in collaboration with our USC Assistive Technology Program, as well as some of our guest speakers will be featured from North Carolina and Georgia as well. We are very excited to do this event. Our focus will be educators and teaching them about accessibility, as well as teaching them how to teach students how to be more accessible. So we're very excited about this event and hosting it for our educators and, if need be, staff, superintendents as well. So it's not limited because we do know that in some cases, those are certified educators as well. We also will be doing a lot of presentations during some of our statewide conferences over the summer. The Education Business Summit, our State Education Technology Conference, which occurs in October, and most importantly, any opportunity that we can hosting some one-on-one events for districts.
SCDE also has a really interesting perspective on how accessibility relates to your standards. Tell us about that.
Well, SDE recognizes the fact that one of our initiatives, as far as the vision for our agency, is to make sure that all students graduate career and college ready. So, with that component, the keyword all, we want to make sure within regards to our curriculum standards that we do adapt as many components of accessibility as possible. This could include the online resources that we offer, such as our learning management system, our learning object repository for which content is loaded from different resources. We are trying to build in-house some cohort models for districts this year that they could use. We're also having conversations with different departments, such as our virtual education component of the State Department of Education, and other officers, such as our career and education technology divisions, to see how we could be of some support to those individuals that are responsible for educating teachers as well as students. Our hopes is that this will be ingrained into our standards statewide at some point so that we know that we're covering all bases. As mentioned, our department does not develop standards, but we do try our best to help to influence some of those that make those decisions to keep digital accessibility in mind.
Last question. How can people stay in touch with the work that you're doing at the South Carolina Department of Education? Social media? Is there an email address that people might be able to follow up with some questions about the work that you're doing? How can people reach out?
People can reach out to us via email. For Valerie, it's vbyrd, that is VBYRD at ed.sc.gov. And they can also reach Lydia Hutto at lhutto, which is LHUTTO at ed.sc.gov. Individuals can also reach us via our website at ed.sc.gov. and that's the South Carolina State Department of Education.
Lydia and Valerie, thanks so much for joining us on today's episode of the Accessible Learning Experience podcast, for sharing all of the great work that's happening in South Carolina around digital accessibility. And we wish you all the best, and we look forward to following along and supporting you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Accessible Learning Experience, brought to you by the National Center on Accessible Educational Materials at CAST. You can find us on the web at aem.cast.org. There you'll find show notes with links to all of the resources mentioned on each episode. Thanks again for listening, and remember, accessibility is everyone's responsibility. The contents of this podcast were developed under a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Department of Education. However, those contents do not necessarily represent the policy of the U.S. Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government.